I now call the next debate, which is future of citizens' advice bureaus in Birmingham. Mr. Jack Dromey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. This is a debate of immense importance for the people of Birmingham. The Birmingham CAB is the oldest and largest in the country, dating back to 1939. Progressively, the Birmingham CAB has opened 5 offices in Birmingham to meet great and growing demand. Last year, the Birmingham CAB provided advice and support to 56,000 people. They also provide a comprehensive web of outreach services for those who find it hard to access mainstream services. For example, GP practices, children's centres, hospitals, dementia advice project and the Macmillan Cancer Support. The Birmingham CAB employs 100 full-time staff, and those full-time staff work with a dedicated army of 166 volunteers, including the excellent Paul Ballantyne here today, the chair of the trustees, and the excellent John Orchard, a volunteer from the CAB, both of whom have devoted many years to the work with the CAB in support of the most vulnerable in Birmingham. And vulnerable they are because in my area in particular, my constituency, King's Standing, we have a CAB in one of the poorest and most deprived wards in Britain, much cherished by the people who live in that ward. Now, Birmingham has been hard hit, highest unemployment in the West Midlands anywhere in Britain. But just at a time when Birmingham needed support and the people of Birmingham in need of advice needed somewhere to go for that advice and support, all 5 of the Citizens' Advice Bureaus, their general advice services will close. Why, Mr. Chairman? It's a combination, on the one hand, of the callous cuts being made by the government to local government services in Birmingham, £170 million that will come out of the budget next year alone, and on the other hand, the cruel incompetence of the council.
Would my honourable friend on?
Yes.
I'm grateful. I don't know if my honourable friend saw the Prime Minister's very helpful comment in the Telegraph on Sunday, where he said that councils should look to reduce their chief executive's salaries before they cut citizens' advice bureaus. Given that the chief exec in Birmingham is one of the highest paid in the country, shouldn't he and some of his senior officers take a cut before the CAB?
Jack Dromey.
The honourable member makes a very powerful point. The last thing that should be cut is advice from citizens' advice bureaus to the people of Britain. If there are to be reductions, then it should start at the top in Birmingham City Council. Now, the CAB had planned for some time, going back to March of last year, for some council cuts, but then suddenly, out of the blue, they were told in December, just before Christmas, that they would lose all their funding from March 2011. The CAB then made repeated approaches to the council to try and find a way forward. What have they been told? Sorry, you'll have to close by March, but then you can reapply for a fresh funding stream in August of this year. That means the CAB's generalist advice services close down for 5 months with no certainty whatsoever that there will then be support at the next stages. I'll give way to both members.
I thank the member for giving way. Does it not accept that the City Council is in fact offering interim funding to maintain the service, and that the CAB had not actually put any proposals forward for any savings whatsoever?
Order. Sorry.
That it's not only in,
Order.
Birmingham that these cuts are taking place, but in Coventry and other places as well.
Sorry, I called Richard Burden.
I didn't hear that.
Thank you, Mr. Sheridan, and I guess it's an intervention on my honourable friend. But before I started that, I think the answer to the honourable gentleman opposite is no. But would my honourable friend just comment on the fact that on a debate on the 26th of January in another place, Baroness Wilcox said central government has not been notified of the closure of any citizens' advice bureaus since the spending review settlement 2010. The government are aware that local authorities that fund CABs are facing tough decisions, but do not expect them, when making those decisions, to pass on disproportionate cuts to other service providers, especially the voluntary sector. And would he join me in inviting the Minister, when he responds, to say, what does that mean, other than just words, if they let happen what looks like happening in Birmingham?
Dromey.
The honourable member is absolutely right. It's proof positive once again that the government is simply out of contact with the consequences of their actions. What's happening in Birmingham is clear beyond any doubt. The question that we'll be asking today is what do ministers intend to do about it? Now, on this point then about the Council, and the honourable member makes the point, have they explored alternatives? Repeatedly, they've explored alternatives. I've seen the correspondence backwards and forwards. They've tried to find a way forward. But what have they been met with? Amongst other things, abuse by the Cabinet member concerned, Councillor Ayub Khan, just when the CAB was looking for a cooperative approach to try and find a way forward, including making economies consistent with protecting the service to the community, they've run up against a brick wall.
John Hemming.
The honourable member in his speech earlier made reference to the fact that he claimed that there was no proposal for any funding from April onwards. In fact, there is a proposal to make interim funding available, and that, to be fair, I have discussed with the CAB themselves.
Well, there'll be a meeting, a crucial meeting, on Monday of next week. As things stand, the CAB will have no alternative but to close down its generalist advice services. No alternative. Now, if as a consequence of today, the government says, standing by previous statements, that they mean what they say, that CAB should not close on the one hand, and the Council sees sense on the other hand, then not only will the CAB celebrate that, so too will the people of Birmingham. Now, if there is not a change, Mr. Chairman, let's just bring home what the consequences will be for the people of Birmingham. All of us as members representing Birmingham can give examples, the kind of problems our honourable member sees in Coventry as well. But let me just give you three. First of all, and I quote, I didn't know what sort of help to get regarding family difficulty with breach of custody agreement. I was terrified that I may lose my son to a hostel and wouldn't know about who to go to about my rights as a father if it wasn't for the CAB. That family problem, a very difficult one, was successfully resolved. Secondly, a client of the CAB, disabled, living alone in an empty flat on low income with no furniture, had no idea about the support available, social tariffs for utilities, community care grant or budgeting loan for furniture. Thanks to the CAB, that disabled woman now lives in comfort, properly supported. And thirdly, another case of a client with cancer who, without the help of the CAB, would not have been able successfully to challenge a decision not to award her benefits. So the consequences for people like that, and for the people of Birmingham more generally, Mr. Chairman, will be severe indeed. Where will they turn to at their time of need? And just at a time when demand is increasing. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Shannon.
I think the issue for a great many of us as elected representatives and as MPs, we recognise the good work that CABs do, but we also recognise with the changes that the coalition government are putting forward in relation to benefits, the demand for CAB services will increase and the concerns will increase, and the homelessness and the loss of benefits and the loss of income are critical issues over the next 4 to 5 years.
The honourable member, Mr. Chairman, makes a very powerful point indeed, and I suspect all members of Parliament, let alone advice agencies, are seeing the same trend of growing demand in terms of support from us, advice on housing, advice on homelessness, advice on benefits, advice on debt, a whole range of issues coming to us because there's growing demand at a time when the economy is in difficulties on the one hand and the government is cutting back vital services to the people of Britain and Northern Ireland on the other.
Thank you for giving way. Would the honourable gentleman agree with me that CABs and other advice agencies are facing a double whammy at the moment with cuts, because the closure of the Financial Inclusion Fund is going to leave 100,000 people who were served last year by this without anywhere to turn to in the future, and that over 500 advice workers at the moment, skilled and trained advice workers, are currently serving their notice.
Dromey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The honourable member is absolutely right, and she brings to this debate the wisdom and experience of many years that she has had personally in the CAB, and it's very welcome, the contribution she makes, and she's absolutely right, once again, to bring home the consequences of what the government is doing. Now, if I can say this, Mr. Chairman, just in terms of the folly of these cuts, very interesting independent academic research has demonstrated that for every £1 invested in advice, it yields a return of up to £10 because early intervention produces the best results. So, Mr. Chairman, what we will see, it's as simple as this, is the CAB and the other advice services are run down and closed. There will be greater risk of debt, greater risk of homelessness, greater risk of poverty, greater mental health problems risk, and greater risks of relationship breakdown, simply because now the tried and tested services upon which people depend at a time of need will go. I give way to the honourable lady first, and I give way to the honourable lady first.
Gisela Stewart.
I'm extremely grateful, and as a fellow Birmingham MP, does he share my experience that the two agencies I most heavily rely on when constituents come to my advice surgeries is the CAB and the Immigration Advisory Service? As the one source of reliable, independent advice, and there's no alternative, and if we lose that, our people will lose.
The honourable member again speaks from her great experience in Edgbaston, and she is absolutely right, because these are vital services, including on the issue of immigration. And the question then arises, and ministers will have to answer this, where will people go? Where will people go if we see the fabric of our advice services torn apart, and as I'll say in just one moment, not the CAB, but a total of 13 closed down in Birmingham?
Advice service. But does he not agree with me that the CAB should not take an all-or-nothing approach and should be willing to compromise with the City Council and aim to maintain a service at a lower cost?
The honourable member raises a point which, to be absolutely frank, is wrong. Because what the CAB has made consistently clear is that they are prepared to do precisely that. But dialogue with Birmingham City Council has proved to be a dialogue with the deaf. Now, if what the honourable member is going to do today is to speak out and call upon Birmingham City Council joining the Labour MPs of Birmingham in hoping that good sense will break out next Monday, that would be very welcome indeed.
I have been working on proposals with
John Hemming.
for interim funding to maintain a substantial part of the CAB service, so that's been happening.
Mr. Chairman, I give way to the honourable member.
Khalid Mahmood.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I think the real issue here, and as opposed to what the honourable member opposite is saying, is I've got two advice centres, CAB advice centres, one just in my constituency, one just outside, who serve some of the most deprived people in those areas. We have real issues in relation to health, housing, and mental health. I have an organisation called COPE, who provides mental health issues advice on that, which is about to close in the next 2 months because the City Council isn't providing any support. I have the Asian Resource Centre, which is also closing down, as well as the CABs. So there will be a huge issue, as my honourable friend says, in relation to support for the most vulnerable in our society, and there's been no dialogue with the City Council at all on that.
Dromey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The honourable member is, of course, right, because it's not just the Citizens Advice Bureau. To name but some of the organisations threatened: the Afro-Caribbean Millennium Centre, Age Concern, Birmingham and in Perry Bar, the Birmingham Asian Resource Unit, TC Centre for the Unemployed, the Chinese Community Centre, a whole range of advice services catering for the needs of the various communities of Birmingham, all facing closure. And if you total together those 13 advice services, Mr. Chairman, between 80 and 100,000 people a year seek advice from them. That's 1 in 10 of Birmingham citizens, about 1 in 4 families. Such is the scale of the need that these admirable institutions meet at the moment. Now, Mr. Chairman, it would appear that this is not just cruel and callous, but it might be potentially unlawful as well, because the NCVO, an admirable organisation, has now written to Birmingham City Council raising concerns over the legality of the cuts in relation to both consultation and equality impact assessments. And there will be many of us who will give evidence in any proceedings, because we know from our experience that there was no proper consultation in advance on the one hand, and no serious impact assessments were conducted on the other hand. The Council made these decisions just before Christmas, and they've gone hell for leather to implement them at the next stages with no proper consultation or no impact assessments. Now, if I can say this, Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, what is absolutely essential is that the Government acts and the Council acts. And that means that if a solution is to be found securing the long-term future of these admirable organisations, that there will need to be at least interim funding put in place whilst we seek to find a long-term solution. I give way to the honourable member.
Andrew, thank the honourable member for giving way, and I thank him also for his comments. And the situation is the same across the country, and in my constituency in Goole, my CAB is facing a similar threat. The point he just made I wanted to reinforce actually is that there's got to be a long-term solution here, because this is not something that hasn't happened before. The CAB is constantly battling for various funding streams, and what we really need is something that puts this absolutely vital service on a proper long-term footing. And I entirely agree with what he's been saying.
Dromey.
I'm grateful to the honourable member, and he makes, again, from his own experience, a powerful point, because the current arrangements mean that this admirable institution, the CAB, lives from hand to mouth, never quite certain that it can count upon the next funding round, next funding stream. It makes it very difficult to plan. John and Paul here today are outstanding at doing precisely that. But it then becomes impossible to plan if you get told in December you're going to have to close down in March, and you might be able to, or you might not get money in August of this year. It is, to be blunt, an absolute farce, and it's something that requires urgent action by government to put right. And let me close exactly on those points, Mr. Chair. There's been a clear, I think, expression of view from both sides that what we need to see is action by ministers. I have to say this with the greatest of respect to the Minister. Ministers cannot wash their hands of responsibility. If the big society means anything, and they proclaim that the CAB and these advice agencies are a key part of that, what does government intend to do about it? Will government call upon Birmingham City Council to think again? And then when that meeting takes place on Monday of next week, that's precisely what we hope for, that Birmingham City Council will think again. I pay tribute to this outstanding institution, its outstanding employees and its outstanding volunteers. It needs to be able to serve the people of Birmingham well for the next 70 years as it has for the last 70. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Minister.
Mr. Chairman, can I congratulate the honourable gentleman, the member for Birmingham Erdington, on securing this debate on what I agree with him is a very important subject. And I'd like to thank the number of members who've intervened on this debate. The honourable gentleman used the phrase, the adjective admirable, on many occasions in relation to the Citizens Advice Bureau of Birmingham. I'm sure he meant Citizens Advice Bureau everywhere, and I would want to concur with him totally in that regard. Like other, in a second, I just want to finish this point. Like other honourable gentlemen and ladies, I do advice surgeries every week in my constituency. In fact, I do 2 every week. I have done 2 every week since 1997. Every Monday morning at 8 AM in my office, and either on Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday morning, I spend between 5 to 6, sometimes even 9 hours face-to-face with constituents every week. So I see a lot of the cases he talks about, whether they're benefits or debt, housing or antisocial behaviour. And I and my staff work with the Citizens Advice Bureau in Kingston. We work with things like Kingston Church's Action on Homeless. We work with a number of organisations to help the most vulnerable in our society, and we do that willingly, as does every single member in this room. And so we know the importance of Citizens Advice Bureau. I know the importance that they place in our society, whether you call it the big society, whether you call it something else. So I'm afraid he'll have to get behind me in the queue for praising the work of the volunteers and the professional staff of the Citizens Advice Bureau, both in every community in our country and indeed in the national organisation. And I hope when he hears my remarks, he will understand that this government does support the Citizens Advice Bureau. But give way to my honourable gentleman.
I think it helps to put on record some of the history that's gone on, particularly with the CAB. Yes, a decision was taken in November that money needs to be saved in this particular area, but the objective was to maintain services, and therefore interim funding was made available. The CAB took the view that it was all or nothing. They wanted to continue interim funding at the same rate the funding was being withdrawn. Now, to be fair, since that point I've had a meeting with the Chief Executive of the CAB, and although they started the meeting with the position they needed to maintain interim funding at the same rate, in fact they have now agreed that to look for savings. But that's far too late. Let us hope, I have a meeting with Councillor Ayub Khan about this issue on Friday. Let us hope we now have a situation where the CAB, rather than issuing threats of legal action, is willing to cooperate to maintain the services. And what I would ask from the CAB is that they cooperate for maintaining services. And I would ask it from the Minister that the Minister cooperates because of the other funding streams, which are crucially important as well.
Well, I'm certainly grateful for my honourable friend on that intervention, Mr Chairman, because I think it was actually quite helpful. Certainly some of the information. In a second, let me answer the intervention first, and I'll take other interventions subsequently. Certainly the information that he's provided just then and in other interventions backs up the information that I've received, that in no way is this there's been a final deal, that people locally, both on the council within Birmingham CAB, are talking to each other. Local MPs like himself are trying to help resolve this issue, working hard on behalf of local people in Birmingham, and that's exactly how it should be. Give way to the gentleman.
And I mean, can I gently put it to him that those of us that have experience of working with Birmingham City Council know that it's all too often like trying to knit fog. And unlike the honourable gentleman for Yardley, rather than get my knitting needles out, I'd rather get rid of the fog. But if the Minister has looked into this issue, will he answer me this question? Has he taken the view whether Birmingham City Council's actions so far, the way it's dealt with this, are compact compliant or not?
Minister. He won't be surprised that for a minister to second-guess every action of every council in the country would be the wrong thing to do, and I hope he will agree with that. If he does agree with localism, I hope he will agree that local authorities and the councillors who are elected to serve them should take responsibility and be accountable to their local electorate. Hold on, if I make some, I will let the honourable lady in a second if she'll just let me finish. So I do think it's important that local councillors of all parties play their role in trying to sort out their local problems in their areas. I will take the interventions, but hopefully if I make some progress in my remarks, I can talk about other issues which are very germane to this wider debate about Citizens Advice Bureau. Give way to the Honourable Lady.
I'm grateful, given that we've got 6 out of the 10 Birmingham MPs here, who've got some considerable experience of working with the council. Could you specifically answer whether it is his view that Birmingham is compact compliant? It's a very, very important point.
I'm afraid I'm not going to give the Honourable Lady an answer to that question. I think it's very important that, as this is settled, as the meetings we've heard about, whether meetings just happened, meeting on Friday, meeting on Monday, try to resolve this matter. Hopefully they will ensure that any regulatory demands from central government are met. I give way to my honourable friend.
The best way forward is for the CAB and the Council to cooperate in how to maintain services rather than issue threats of legal action.
Well, I would certainly agree, and I think this is a wider point, and it does go beyond Birmingham, Mr Chairman. It's really important that local authorities and CAB, in these very difficult times, and I want to talk about that in a second, if he lets me make some progress, do actually try to work together. And I can give this from the heart from my own constituency, where my local council signed up a few years ago to a 3-year strategic partnership with Kingston CAB to make sure that they had some stability of funding. This is one of the issues that was discussed in the debate. Now, I do understand that local authorities are under serious pressure, as is government and Whitehall departments, as indeed is all those across the public sector. At the moment, we do have some very difficult funding times. That is hardly a secret. So those sorts of long-term deals need to be seen in that context. But I do recommend, certainly from my local experience, that if you can have strategic partnerships by key voluntary players like the CAB and the local council, these sorts of problems can be resolved more easily. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Stephen McCabe.
I'm extremely grateful to the Minister. I simply wanted to ask him if his response is part of a double act with the Honourable Member for Yardley. Could he ask the Honourable Member for Yardley why there was no mention of transitional funds in the Council report in November? That seems to have emerged when the Honourable Gentleman for Yardley wanted to make his contribution today.
Minister.
When I eventually get to that point in my speech, Mr. Chairman, I will be able to say that certainly prior to today I was aware that there was some transitional funding. So I don't think it's emerged within the last few minutes, Mr. Chairman. I think one should put on record, and I think honourable members opposite do need to hear this, because there is a backdrop to this debate, and that is the absolute record deficit that this administration, this government, has inherited. And we have had to take some very difficult decisions. And I can tell honourable members here today that one of the most difficult decisions I've had, one of the most difficult decisions I've had to take as Minister was telling the Chief Executive of the Citizens Advice Bureau that his budget, because it was before G. Guy took over, had to be cut in year by a significant percentage. I didn't like having to deliver that decision, but I knew that we had to take some tough decisions because we had such a difficult spending climate. And it's exceedingly important that those tough decisions are taken in a fair way, but are implemented. And local authorities are going to have to face up to that issue as well, whether it's Birmingham City Council, Kingston Council, or other councils. I'm going to give way to my honourable friend, but I hope he will realise that I will need to make some progress after this intervention from him.
John agrees with me that CAB funding in Birmingham was perfectly stable until the party opposite almost bankrupted the country.
Minister.
It's very tempting to answer that, but I'm going to make some progress. As a result of these financial difficulties, Mr. Chairman, I think all councils are having to re-examine how services are organised and run, finding efficiencies and unlocking savings. We have sought to make that task easier by scrapping most ring-fencing constraints on councils' funding so they have greater freedom to manage their resources in the best possible way. And this does involve joining up back office functions, sharing chief executives, other senior managers, cutting out duplication and waste associated with procurement, and where possible it should not mean cuts to frontline services. And we say that not just to Birmingham City Council, but to all local authorities. Mr. Chairman, it's worth noting that while all Citizens Advice Bureau are members of the national umbrella organisation Citizens Advice, they do operate independently. And I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman for Birmingham Erdington will at least admit that. And their funding is determined locally. That is not a new thing. That has been the case for many, many years, and the last administration and administration before that. And the funding is determined by the relevant local authority. And that actually is how it should be. Because needs for advice, needs for these sorts of services, do vary dramatically across the country. I'm sure the needs of Birmingham are different from the needs of Kingston. So I don't think there should be any doubt about this, that these should be local services. I'll give way to the lady, because I know she's worked so hard in this area and been Chief Executive for CAB.
The honourable gentleman agree with me, though, that funding from the local authority quite often acts as seed corn funding for the other funding that Bureau get, so that for every £1 that the local authority put in, on average there is £10 from other sources gained by Citizens Advice Bureau.
Well, I will certainly agree with the Honourable Lady that funding from local authorities can be critical to the way Citizens Advice Bureau can plan their budgets going forward. So I certainly don't disagree with the point she's made. And yeah, of course.
Because we're getting close to the end of the debate, and it's of the highest importance that clear message is sent to the people of Birmingham. There is a meeting scheduled for next Monday. We hope that we will see progress made. Can I ask the Minister this question? In the event of progress not being made next Monday, would he be prepared to meet with a delegation from the Birmingham CAB, both the admirable people who work for it, the admirable people who are volunteers for it, and indeed some of the people who depend upon it?
I would not want to prejudge what the meetings it seems to be, because it should be plural, that are going to happen over the next few days. It is up to individual councils like Birmingham to work with their partner organisation to sort out some of these difficulties. I understand that Birmingham City Council has reviewed advice provision within this whole city and will be moving towards a new commissioning process in the summer, and that all the independent advice providers will be eligible to apply, and that will, of course, include the Bureau. I also understand that Birmingham City Council recognises there may be short-term problems for some of the independent advice providers during the period until new contracts are awarded. And I believe the Council has a transition fund, which my honourable friend, Member for Birmingham Yardley, has talked about, which might be used to help these organisations through this period. And that the meeting scheduled for Monday is focused on discussing this. So I think these are positive developments. The honourable gentleman didn't touch on them in his speech, but I think it is worth putting on the record because I hope they will result in a successful outcome to this debate. I am concerned that hasty decisions taken by councils now could lead to the necessary loss of important citizens' advice services, not just in the City of Birmingham, but in other areas. And I trust that when local authorities work carefully with their Citizens' Advice Bureau, try to strike up the strategic partnerships that I've talked about, that this will not happen.
Order. Again, can I ask colleagues who are not staying for the next debate to leave quickly and